I'm gonna go listen in from my computer.
Okay.
So
Guys.
Hi, everybody. This is Rebecca. It looks like Jason is on, and I think he started the recording for us. So this meeting is being recorded. I think Denise, are you on?
Yeah, here.
Okay, cool. It says Abby as your name.
Yeah, it's my daughter's name.
Okay, sounds good. I just wanted to make sure that you were on, so we had a recording secretary.
Yeah,
so.
you're good.
All right, so it's 7:01. I'll call this meeting to order. In terms of attendance, let's see. We have Jimbo, who can hear us and see us, but he doesn't have speakers right now. I told him to call in, so he's going to try to do that. So he is on listening. We have Rick, and we have Heather, who is one of our newest members. She was sworn in 2 weeks ago, I think.
I don't think I was officially sworn in.
Okay.
no, but Rebecca, this is Jason. I can swear her in as long as we're doing it over video.
Okay. Do you want to do that first?
Whenever you want.
Let's do it now so she can participate in our meeting. That'd be great.
Rebecca, I'm sorry, Heather,
Yes.
raise your right hand.
Yep.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm, as the case may be, that you will faithfully discharge, according to law, your duties as a member of the Charter Revision Commission to the best of your abilities, so help you God, or upon penalty of perjury?
I do.
Welcome aboard.
You are now a member. Okay, so we have Heather, Nicole, Tanya, Rick, Jimbo, Ruth Ann, and those are our members. Denise is on as our recording secretary, and Amy is here, who is the town treasurer, and Jason. I think that's everybody. So I would entertain a motion for the approval of the meeting minutes from March 17th, 2020 for our regular meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, I heard the motion by Rich and seconded by Tanya. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All right. We will move on to public participation. Tom, I think that's you. If you have anything to say.
Yeah, Tom Lansner, 27 Laurel Circle. Yeah, I was looking at Amy's spreadsheet from earlier today, and I was hoping that she would have a chance to share that on the screen and go through it.
Yes, I can share my screen as well. Or because I know, Amy, you're on your iPad, so I'm sure you can't share your screen. So I can share mine and kind of just walk us through it. Is there any other public participation? All right, let's jump into it. Let me rearrange my screens since I have more than one. And where is the present button? Video. Where did it go?
I think it's at the bottom. It says share screen.
Oh, there we go. Oh, Jason, can you fix that? It says host disabled participant sharing. Unless you want to share your screen, Jason. Either one is fine. Jason, you're muted.
I said, how about now? Try it now.
Okay. Desktop one, share screen. All right, can everybody see my screen
Yes.
for Amy's chart? Okay, Amy, you can take it away and tell me where to start.
All right, we'll go back to the very first tab, which is 2017.
Okay.
And I'm going to just explain some of the premises of how I came up with it before we get into any of the numbers.
Yes, please.
So I took the fiscal 15-16 approved budget and then placed all the scenarios you guys asked me. The 2% without debt service and capital, the 8% without debt service and capital, the 8% everywhere. And then if you move a little bit to the farther left, And then I did one that was a 2% tax increase. So basically right now, our charter says if we fail 3 referendums, we're going to a 2%, but it's a 2% spend. It's not tied to taxes at all. So basically everything, the tax, we come up with the budget and the taxes fall out based on what that budget is. So we could have a bigger than 2% tax increase on a 2% budget, depending on what other things happened in other revenue accounts. So if we go back to the front screen, I'll show you how I came up with the numbers so that you guys are looking at the right, see where you say 16, 17 approved in the second column of numbers? As you see, those local numbers and the Fed numbers or state numbers and the use of fund balance numbers, if you looked at all 3 or 4 of those tabs, you will see different numbers in every single one. So those numbers impact the top number, which is the overall taxes. That tax number is all kinds of taxes, whether it's interest, whether it's liens, whether it's supplemental motor vehicle, real estate, personal property, all taxes are in there. So each one may have different percentages. So if you looked at the budget, these are actually presented in 2 different pages on the budget sheet. If you went on to the website under town financials and it said approved budgets, you would see these same numbers under the approved budget. But you will see the second page down after the summary has all the detail that make up the different taxes. So that's where these numbers came from. So the only 2 numbers or 2 sets of numbers I used off the actual 16, 17 for you guys is the 3 other sources of revenue, the ones Rebecca had just highlighted for you. Those are carried forward into the next column, 3 columns over, 3 more columns over. So that's what I did in all of those numbers, is because what basically says is this is how much we're going to spend. So pick a number, $37 million. And it's what do we get other than taxes? And it takes out all the pieces, the money coming from the state, the money coming from fund balance, the money coming from local revenues, which is town clerk fees, conveyance fees, building fees, planning fees. So all those other things are sum up into that. I think it's $500,000 just about in that number there. So those numbers I carried from the 16, 17 because the scenarios I was doing for you were 16, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, and 19, 20, which are the 4 different tabs. But the kinds of scenarios are exactly the same in each of the spreadsheets. The only other place I took the numbers from to spread across the spreadsheet other than doing calculations based on last year's approved budget is down in the debt and the capital. Because in some of the scenarios, you asked me to leave it as it was requested. So instead of using 15, 16s debt and capital, I used 16, 17s. And that number is carried forward in the same places as the revenue was across the screen, with the exception of when you get to the one where you wanted 8% overall, you'll see there's a different debt service number and a different capital number because there is, that's 8%, as you see over on the side. So actually CIP actually went down because they were originally projecting a 16% increase on CIP. So that number actually went down at 8%, where debt, they were only looking for just over a 1% increase. So that number went up based on the 8% overall of every piece being 8%. Down below, I have mill rates for you and percentages tied to them. So I start with the first column is the true real mill rate. The grand list is truly the grand list. The calculation is always done on 98.5% because the assumption is that some portion of it will not be collectible, whether it's written off, whether it's not collected, whether it's appealed and it gets reduced. So there's an assumption of 1.5% not being collected. And then your mill rates. And so the bottom 2 numbers are true mill rates for 15-16 year and for 16-17 year. And then all the numbers after that are based on the assumptions you gave me to work through. So that's basically my explanation. And then what I did is I did each of the years, but with all of the same scenarios that you guys asked for. Unfortunately, because if you look through the years, things swing wildly. If you go to the next tab, we go from $6 million of state revenue to 4 million, I think. So we have 100,300,000 reduction. So that makes your taxes swing high because you don't have as much state money coming in. We tried to offset that, you can see through the Board of Finance, by upping the fund balance. Instead of using 250, they went to 475 or 425. I can't read the number, it's too small on my screen. It went to 475. So they did an increase of $225,000 trying to offset some of that reduction from the state. So the numbers in both local, state, and use of fund balance make a huge difference on your tax impact. So it's going to be very difficult to say, if we go straight with a 2% budget, this is what it's going to be. Like here, this is a good example. Your 2% budget down below is a 5.69% tax increase. And that's also, if you look, that must have been a reval year, because your, if you look at your grand list, you went from, go back to 17's bottom of the page for a second. Yeah, you went from $961 million on your grand list to 869. So you lost $100 million in grand list the last time you revaled. So all those things impact what happens. So it's not easy to say we're just going to make it a flat 2% tax increase, or we're just going to make it a 2% expenditure. All those other things impact every single one, and each one has something different about it or something unique about it that has impacts. So it's not going to be as easy to just lay them side by side. I didn't lay them side by side because I wanted you to know that if you took 16-17's approved budget and did the scenarios, this is what 17-18 would have looked like in all those different scenarios that you asked me to look at. So, and none of them matched the approved exactly. So I don't know if that's helpful to you guys. I don't think it probably came out what you guys were thinking. So if you look on down here, your 8% year that you wanted everything 8%, the tax increase is 14. Because you have less taxable grand list, then you need to bring in a higher percentage to get yourself to 8% expenditures. And then I did your Social Security COLAs. They are a 12-month COLA. If you go to the Social Security Administration, there's a page that actually gives you each of the different COLAs. And if you look, I think one year they're 0, another year they're 0.3, another year they're 2%. So I did that as a column, but it is a 12-month. It's 12 months starting with third quarter of the year before to third quarter of the year that it comes out in. So I did all those for you, but like I said, I'm not sure this is really going to answer your questions as well as you might have thought it might have. And 19 and 20 are really the same, except that they have their own nuances of what went on there. So our taxes, our money from the state came up. So now for a 2% budget, if you look at the 2% one, except CIP and debt, your taxes are only, they're actually going down 0.55. So two things probably happened. I'm guessing we had grand list growth. I think this one is the one that the grand list was wrong though. So our grand list of 959 had included a bunch of exemptions that didn't belong, and we switched assessors and it didn't get caught. So we didn't collect. If you looked at the actuals to that budget, we did not collect. I want to say about $400,000 or $600,000 of that money, because we couldn't collect it because it wasn't eligible to be taxed. It was already exemptions that were issued. They just were not accounted for on the grand list. So then if you go to 1920, we had this grand list growth, but if you go down on the bottom, you'll see that the grand list was actually less. So the assessor shares, oh, we had this grand list growth, and then I come out with a lower number and people are like, what? Well, she forgot to say that the adjustment that she made that equaled that $600,000 of tax revenue brought it down to X before it then went back up, but it still ended up being overall a lower number. So same situation in this case. It was a 2% budget and overall taxes were just 0.36. Now those can be impacted. We could do, if we upped motor vehicle sup, that number is going to be a bigger percent. It's a lot smaller number. But so the actual taxes could have been 1.5%. But if we increase the other 3 kinds of revenue, then the taxes are going to look like they're less than they really were. I don't know if that helps. The one nice thing is these numbers are a little more stable for the state and local. So it didn't cause a huge impact. Your 8% budget that you wanted everything 8% was 7.62. So that's relatively reasonable. When you left debt and capital as it was, it ended up being just a 7.26. So you just got a little bit, because those are 2 small numbers. I mean, and when you look at the overall budget, you know, a $40 million budget, there's a big chunk of it is Board of Ed. And then the next big chunk is all the town services. And then debt service and capital are a little tiny slice. Together, they're just barely $2 million of the $40 million budget. So they don't have as big an impact, but what they do have right now with the 2% limitation that we have is I can't issue new debt even though we have plenty of capacity, because I can't cover my debt service payments. If you give me $1 million and you only give me a 2% on it, it only gives me 20 grand. 20 grand is not enough to make a debt payment on any kind of issue. It's not even enough for $1 million issue. So that's where the cap, if it had gotten removed from debt service or capital, that would be where that would be helpful, is that it would allow me to do debt, issue some kind of debt, and then be able to make that amount of money be enough to actually make the debt service payments going out the 10 years or 20 years, depending on what we did.
Right, because that was one of the big factors that we had asked for, having the CIP and the debt stuff be removed from that budget, or the 2%, because that was, I think it was Kathy Simonelli that had brought that up, that it's been the issue for CIP that they can't get anything. So
yeah, and it's a bigger problem, not for, unless the CIP, you know, the CIP, we're not putting in nearly what we should. I think our people asked for 3 million. They sent forward 1.5 million. The board has cut it to 920,000 because there's not enough money to go around. When you're doing 2% budgets, it's very hard, especially when you have a medical renewal. They first gave us a guess of 25, then it went down to 16, and now it's at 9. But when you have to do a big expense like that, which is a couple $1 million for us, at 9%, that means everything else has to be less than 2. Because
Yes.
someone to make that up.
Well, thank you very much for putting this together. I think it's helpful. Honestly, myself, I've not had a chance to fully dive into this and look at it, but the explanations definitely helped. So does anybody else on the board have any questions? Want to start discussions on anything? Anyone?
You're saying, hi, Jimbo here.
Hey, Jimbo.
You're saying that the auditors didn't catch a $400,000 error?
It wasn't an error. It was,
Okay.
so when the assessor puts together the grand list, she certifies it and sends it to the state. So we used that certified grand list when we calculated our budget in April. Because why would we not? And no, the auditors would never, they are not going and checking assessed value. They are checking random samples of, are we paying things out of the budgets we should? If we have a budget line that has no money left in it, they might especially scrutinize that one, because did you have expenses that you pushed off to next year? Or, so they're really looking for someone not putting things where they belong or not putting them in the right year. They are not certifying that the assessor did her job right or that the tax collector did her job right. Some of the stuff, they could come across things that were either not okay or were okay. And then they might be part of their management letters when they say, this isn't being accounted for correctly, or this needs to be done, or there's a policy that you should have. But they are not really checking those kind of things.
Okay, thank you.
If you adopted the 2% as the tax increase, How would you account for that in a reval year?
I have no idea. It would be miserable.
Yeah,
So if you look at any of those 2% years, if you scroll down to the bottom, Rebecca. So in this case, I would have gotten $1.7 million. Overall, we already got more than that. We went up, I don't know if you can scroll to the other side. We went up from 3.7 to 37,700,000 to 39.3. So we went up 1.5 million, 1.7 million. So we got basically the same amount of money that you would have gotten in a 2% tax increase. And you can see that if you went up to the top in the 2% budget, that one, see, we would have had actually negative. If you had left everything 2% straight across without debt and CIP, even though those were at 2%, your tax increase would have actually been a decrease of $177,000 shared amongst everybody. But there's other places that a 2% tax increase would have made us have less money than the year before, even on some of those other years. And a lot of it is driven off what else is happening. So if you go to the far right, Rebecca. So that one, is that the same number that was on 20? Did we switch tabs?
I don't think so. What's 20?
I
we're
don't
on
know.
20, 1920.
Can we go over? Yeah, so this case, your 2% tax increase would have had the budget only go up 651. And instead, I think it went up a little more than $1 million. If we go to the left, back to the beginning. Oh, so in this one, there's your 2% increase. You would have only had a $312,000 increase. And if you go to the left, you should be able to see on the spreadsheet, you should be able to see the budget actually went up about $600,000. So even though we had a 2% budget, our tax increase was 3.78 with a 2% budget other than capital and debt.
Quite interesting what happens with percents.
And you got to remember all the other things, right? The local, the state, the use of fund balance, the debt, the capital, all have huge impacts on what's a 2% budget mean. But it's never driven off right now. It's never driven off a tax increase. It is always off expenditures. Yeah, one of the examples, the budget actually goes negative with a 2% budget.
Right.
On one of the years. But I tried to keep it consistent, so when you guys were looking at it, you were looking over the same information. So there it is. We would have lost $735,000, and I'm going to guess that's the reval year. I think that's when we lost all our grand lists. So that would show you exactly what would happen in it. Yeah. So this was when our grand list went from $960,000, $960 million on 17, I think. I think it was 960. Yep. Yeah, we went from 960 to 859, 869. So we lost almost $100 million. So if you had had a 2% cap for taxes, we would have had to lose $1 million from one budget to the next.
So if you had a magic wand, where would you make adjustments in the current formula
Well,
to
so
allow for?
somebody had a really good point. They said, why don't you do 3 and 10%? So the first time somebody gets stuck with a 10%, they will rethink not participating in the first 3.
Well, except that either an 8% or a 10%, there's no way it's ever going to pass referendum and become part of the charter.
So I don't know. Like I said, I mean, the 2% is harsh and it's very hard to grow anything, add anything. You know, you guys want more services, more people, and there just is no flexibility or availability in a 2% budget. And that goes on both sides, whether it's the town or the school. And like I said, a big chunk, our medicals, you know, more than $1 million of our $13 million budget is medical insurance, a couple $1 million of it. And that's a big chunk when there's a 9% increase. And you guys are seeing it all in your own businesses too. I mean, hearing that medical is a double-digit increase is nothing unusual year after
No.
year after year. So that's where it makes it very difficult to pick a percent. And unfortunately, like I said, it really depends on what else is going on. If the state cut us a couple $1 million, then it's a problem, because then we have to make it up in taxes. There's real no great silver bullet that says the best thing, if you left it at 2, my suggestion would be that you remove capital and debt out of it. The state formula allows that in their formula. Those are both carved out. So that wouldn't necessarily help our budgets, but that would free up needing to do debt if we want to actually issue debt for some projects.
But what if we were to want, in other words, Rick was saying wave a magic wand, and I'm sorry, I'm on a cell phone.
Like
you
I
know,
said,
what can we do different than a 2%? I mean, can't we base this number on something?
on what?
You know, gross national product? I don't know.
Well, I did those too. I did your CPI Social Security numbers in them for all of them. So you could see if you looked on 19, I think 19 has a reasonable one. So it had a 2. So that would be what would have happened to the budget with a COLA of 2. It's still expense driven. It's not tied to taxes. It's tied to expenditures. So if you go to the one that had nothing in 17 or the one in 18 that had 0.3, it would have been detrimental. You know, unfortunately, the numbers, so unfortunately, COLA's all over the place. The cost of living is just all over the place, and it's tied to CPI. So I think 20s might be 2 point something. Let's see. Yeah, 2.8. So if you did something like that, a 2.8 budget would have given you 133, but then the very next year could be 0. I mean, next year, we'll be lucky if it's 0 with the way things are going right now. So, you know, unfortunately, there really isn't a magic bullet or we're going to pick this number. And it, like I said, it really, that's why I was kind of hoping this 4-year spread of all the different scenarios would really show you guys the impact is all over the place depending on what is happening with everything else. There's not just one number.
This is the way the charter used to be, where if it go a certain amount, it would be decided, I believe, by the Board of Selectmen. And then you wouldn't be involved with numbers and percents. It would be, what do we need for a budget, our expenses.
Well, I'll tell you, as a finance person, I do like the 3 and done, because then we're guaranteed that our tax bills are getting to the printer and we can actually issue our tax bills in June so that the payments come in July. That's the problem with letting it be forever. First of all, you're paying $35,000 to $5,000 every referendum. So if you have forever referendums, I mean, I know one town that went 11 months with no budget. That is not a pretty scenario, and it's very costly and very disruptive for a lot of things.
Well, that's what they did. They'd go to 3, and then it'd be done, and then the Board of Selectmen would decide, make the decisions that needed to be done. And now we have a number driving that instead of well thought out plans.
So I guess if you went back to that kind of scenario where after 3 it was set by the Board of Finance or the Board of Selectmen, I mean, the problem is you don't know why people are voting no.
Well, a lot of them are voting no because of the 2%. They don't see that happening and they vote no. If they think it's going back to the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance, they would look closer at the budget.
I will tell you, the Board of Finance is getting a little taste of that now, because there won't be a referendum. And it's a tough situation to be in. At least if you had some referendums, you would have had an idea of what people were thinking. just from signs around town, discussions people are having, where here, nobody's really had any discussion on the budget and they've got to set it. So I don't know that there's a magic wand. Like I said, so many of the different numbers vary from example to example to example. And that was one of the things I found as I put this together for you. I was like, wow, it makes a huge difference depending on what else is going on in our world. And I obviously can't control those or pick and choose what it means. But
I was truly surprised by the spreadsheets and I expected different results.
And that's what I kind of assumed. When you guys did a list of what you were expecting, I was like, oh, they have no idea what they're going to get, because just from the question you asked, oh, what's 8, what's 2, what's cost of living? And I thought, oh God, when they start to see the other things that impact that it's not just taxes or it's not just expenditures, that you're really going to see it all over the place. No matter which year you pick, something different has happened in each of those years. And I gave you basically 5 years of information because I started with the actual approved budget 15-16 in each of the scenarios. So
the only improvement that I can see in this is to eliminate debt service and capital. That's something of an improvement. Although I was surprised with the numbers there too.
Or if you went to a 3% instead of a 2, that would be easier. But like I said, your taxes, I mean, there's examples where your taxes are swinging wildly, nothing to do with your expenditures. Your expenditures are 2, but your taxes are still huge because other bad things have happened.
Yeah. And I think what it really boils down to is Board of Selectmen, the Board of Education, and the Board of Finance have to find a way to better justify and support the budgets that they put forward. In the final analysis, unless you eliminate referendums altogether, that's the only approach.
Well, you know what?
Significant impacts. And the other thing we might look at is instead of 3 referendums, have 2.
Well, I can remember though, Rick, with the Board of Finance when I served, we went to the 3rd referendum, which got passed, and we didn't change the budget. We just put it back out there. And that's what I think the 2% does cause a problem, because people think there's something better when it's well thought out and planned. I mean, you could go through 3 and the Board of Selectmen or Board of Finance could take the 3rd budget, vote it down, and still use it. I mean, that's what's tying the hands of making real budgets.
What's really tying the hands of making real budgets is the inability of the town to pass a budget on the 1st or 2nd referendum.
Well, when they...
I understand what you're saying, but you have to be realistic as well in terms of, I mean, you can't put, I don't know who suggested 8%, but
I think it was Paul Anderson.
it wasn't me. I mean, that's just unrealistic. If you're going to try that, you might as well eliminate any bottom or floor to the budget, because you're never going to get, well, you'll never get that adopted, first of all. But I thought some of these other formulas would work, but they just don't.
Right, because they're all based on not, it's not complete information. There's different aspects that affect it that no one sees when we're putting budgets out. However, if you look at what the budgets are put out by the different boards and commissions, that's what they need. So again, I'm back to maybe we should eliminate, get through the 3rd referendum or do 2. And if it doesn't pass, well, the people that made up the budget in the first place, and we're discussing they're doing now, they're going to have to pass a budget without a referendum. But the town has 3 opportunities to get a change if they want.
Well, one could argue you're not giving them any opportunity at all because they don't have the final decision.
Well, if they pass it in one of the first 3,
I think it depends on what you believe the town wants and the voters of the town want. Do they want this full participatory democracy where everybody gets to vote on budgets? Or, if you start changing that, then you're changing the basic structure of town meeting government. And I mean, they're interesting questions. Personally, if I was writing the charter and approving it, I'd have the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance be the final arbiters of the budget. And for it to go to referendum, someone would have to circulate a petition requiring a significant number of signatures. But I don't think that's in the cards. So
Well, that definitely
No.
is an option. It works in other towns. You have a town
It
meeting
does.
and you have to have, you either, like what they did in Canton, they were getting no participation. We were passing $40 million budgets with nobody participating, 10 people, 12 people. So what they changed it through charter revision is that it had to be 150 people at that meeting. And one of the very first meetings we had, we actually had to go knock on windows of people sitting in the parking lot at the high school, waiting for their kids to get done with sports to get our 150 voters. So, and same thing, had to go X number of signatures to go to referendum for more participation. But even when we did that, we found that people were still not participating. Even
Yeah,
if
but the
they
voters-
forced it to referendum, the voter turnout was still not much more than the couple hundred people showing up at a town meeting.
but the voters now are thinking no matter what the budget is, they're hearing from the misinformation of a 2%, whether they understand it or not. So if all of a sudden, if we don't pass the budget in 3 votes, which is everybody participating, then the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance would make that decision. And
And
that's close
I don't
to,
think from a finance perspective, I don't think that's a bad thing. They are your
No.
people who are closest to it and are spending month after month looking at reports.
absolutely. I agree with that.
So I'm sorry my analysis didn't give you your silver bullet or your magic
no,
bullet.
no.
It
You'll
definitely helped answer the
Very
question.
quickly from me as a finance person, I am very black and white. And the numbers will be the numbers no matter how many times you ask me.
Yeah, I respect that. I just didn't consider the ramifications of cuts in state funding, for example. That has major, major implications.
But we're not going to be able to cut, say, things like public safety. So you're still going to need a budget for that. School system, you still have to educate the kids. You still got to have garbage pits. And again, the people closest are going to know what we have to cut if it comes to that.
Well, you've got a fundamental question. Do you have referendums or not? Do you have a town meeting? When I first moved to East Windsor 20 years ago, the first town meeting that I went to was a budget hearing. I got there with expectation that I could ask questions and I'd hear presentations on the budget. And within the first couple of minutes, somebody moved to adjourn to a referendum. There was no discussion and it went right to referendum. And it's pretty much done that ever since. And the charter was changed later to require it because every year it went to referendum anyway.
Well, we
I
could
personally
still do
wouldn't
free
mind-
referendum.
Well, we could consider another approach then. We consider the approach where you have a town meeting and that it requires a significant vote to go to referendum. If a town meeting approves the budget, then it requires a significant percentage of the population to go to referendum. And to overturn the town meeting's adopted budget, you could also require that a percentage of those that the percentage turning out to vote in that referendum be at least, say, 15% of the registered voters. And that
Well,
would
again, we're
prevent,
back to using percent though. If we leave it at 3 referendums, and at the end of those 3 referendums, one of the boards will make the final decision if the voters can't, then it would encourage people to be more involved prior to the end of those 3 referendums. That's my thought.
I'm hesitating to speak because I don't want to, I know there are 7 of us here, so.
I know. What's everybody else?
I think what I've noticed with the voters is that there's going to be a certain percentage that are going to say no, no matter what. So that we have to account for anyway. But I do like the idea of the people having the say. And I know that we do budget workshops. I'm wondering if we really talk it up more and market it more and do try to get the people involved more as a goal for the upcoming year. And kind of see how that goes before we change the charter about how many referendums.
So we could get rid of the 2%.
Yeah, that's one of my thoughts too.
Get rid of the 2% and then have what?
3 referendums, and if the people can't decide, in other words, if they vote each budget down, have Board of Finance or Board of Selectmen make the decision. That's how it was done.
Gotcha. Yeah, and we don't need to like vote on this tonight.
No.
This is just the discussion. But at least we have some options based on the numbers that Amy has been able to run for us to say things that we definitely don't want, things that we do want, and kind of make it what's going to work best for the life situations that come forward.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, this is Tom Lansner. When it's appropriate, I'd like to ask a question about the exception for CIP and debt. I don't know if it's speaking out of turn right now, but.
What's your question?
When I was looking at that, my understanding is CIP and debt would not be part of the formula, but is there any guideline to keep those from rising too high? Like right now, they try very hard to keep their increase at 2%. But if they were excluded, would that give them the opportunity to make their budget requests a lot higher?
Yeah, but again, that would go to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, and they would adjust it before it went to the first referendum. But it wouldn't be geared on a 2%, so we might actually get real numbers from CIP.
Right. I mean, I was on the Board of Finance this year, and the real CIP numbers are almost 1.5 million. And those are
Right.
all reasonable projects that ended up being cut to 920,000.
Exactly.
So we had to cut them down knowing that anything more than 2% wouldn't fly. If the CIP is excluded, my understanding is the CIP could be whatever we wanted it to be. There would be no cap on that, right? Other than common sense.
So Tom,
Right,
right,
but
I was gonna say, so Tom, if you take the numbers perspective, they couldn't go crazy because then their tax increase would be crazy.
Oh, I know.
So by the time the Board of Selectmen looks at it, the Board of Finance looks at it, and before it's going to referendum, everybody, even if it went up 3% instead of 2%, I mean, it's taken a long time probably to get to this number. And the number is probably half about what it should be for the size of our town and for the regular requests that are coming through. I think in the analysis of the CIP that's out there on the website, it shows that just to do every year occurring things, we need $1,012,000. So even our 920 doesn't even get us regular police cruiser money, regular DPW trucks, regular road money. So right
But
away,
they're starting looking at a 2%. That everybody starts and says, we have to be 2%. Instead of, this is what I really need to make this work.
Well, we did try that a couple years in a row, and they didn't pass. I mean, the
Because
Board
we
of,
had the 2%.
no, but the Board of Finance tried to let the first referendum go through with people's ideas of what they wanted, the increases they wanted. But you can,
Right.
you know, unfortunately, there's never enough dollars to fund everything that needs to happen. I don't know
I
how
understand that.
different screen on my screen sharing is now rack space.
Oh,
Ah, there we go.
There we go. Well, I just feel
I think
that
it would
the
go
2%, you talk to any department and any of the commissions and any of the boards, some didn't want it. Others wanted more because that's what they need to accomplish what they're supposed to accomplish. And that's the way I see it. You know, we got to have real budgets. The WPCA, which I'm serving on, they wanted to play games for $8 and $16, etc. And we're going to pass a budget, or have, that's a real budget. And then it's like pulling the Band-Aid off so that everyone understands that we've been shorting this and that. You know, robbing Peter to pay Paul in my head. You know, we had a big thing about a kennel. And it's been sitting on CIP, you know, and we're not going to touch it because everybody's worried about a 2%. This is just how I feel. This, you know, we got school systems with unfunded mandates. We got to cover it. So if the state came up with something next year that was a $2 million unfunded mandate, it wouldn't matter. That's why I say budgets need to be more real. You know, you can play games with the numbers and satisfy the taxpayers, but are you really, in the long term, cutting yourself short? And that's what this 2% has done.
Anybody?
I'm done with my rant, by the way.
Anybody else have any input on anything like that?
Well, not specifically on what Jim said. His concerns are very valid from my perspective. Another thing I wanted to add, it just seems like we can't afford what we have. We cannot afford the upkeep of what we currently have. I don't have any kind of resolution to that yet. There's still a lot of thinking to do on this, but
well, if we get our commercial development in, which has always been the plan for 25 some years, then we can roll. But until we get that and we allow projects in.
Well, that's the question every budget poses, is what can you afford? What can your taxpayers afford? What can your community afford, or what do you need? I mean, that's every time you develop a budget, you look at what your needs are and you look at what you believe the community can afford within those needs. That's the whole process of budgeting. the question becomes, do you want to take away the right of citizens to have some input? I think you have to leave some method by which citizens can take a budget to referendum. I don't necessarily believe it needs to go to automatic referendum. And I could support something that said
I could work with something like that, Rick.
requires, somebody to circulate a significant number of, get a significant number of petition signatures to force a budget to referendum. If somebody can generate a lot of signatures, and that says there's a sentiment in the community that the question should be addressed. So if they can generate enough signatures and force it to referendum, then so be it. That's maybe the way it should go. I like having a backstop. I think that's kind of important. I like the removal of debt service and capital from consideration. But again, I mean, they're fundamental questions. Whether you believe citizens should have right somehow to get in on the question. Like this past local election, we had significant controversy in town. We had a real demand for change in what was going on in town. If you get that in the budget, you can pass a budget. If you don't get it, you can't. You need that participation, that arousal in the community, and to support budgets. And there's a possibility that it's there now where it wasn't before.
Mhm. I agree.
Well, I think that there should always be an option for the taxpayers to have a voice.
Well, that's what the 3 referendums would accomplish. If we try to just push a whole new program through, it will fail as a charter question, which is what we have to do, is get by the voters. If we put it in as 3 referendums, the 2% is eliminated, and that it would be decided, I think there'd be a lot of people in favor of that. And, you can always move later on to what Rick is saying.
I think the two are incompatible. The two different approaches are really not compatible. You either said it at the town meeting. Go ahead.
I think he has a point. I think if we're going to do something so drastic, we're going to get severe pushback. We're not going to be able to accomplish anything. I think if we attack this as a process, it will be easier to get this whole momentum of a ship that we need to be on our side to maneuver what we need to have maneuvered.
Just devil's advocate, my point would be if you have 3 referendums and they don't matter, why bother having any referendums?
If you have 3 referendums and they pass it on the second, like we've done it. We've passed budgets in the last few years, and they were well thought out budgets. And I believe they were above 2%.
Well, they needed a consequence at the end. Let's assume 3 budgets fail.
Right.
You're saying in your scenario, those 3 budget referendums meant nothing because now the Board of Finance is going to set the budget, which would be wonderful, but it's not democratic and it's not.
Well, but if I'm voting no on misinformation, such as we're being double taxed because of Warehouse Point Fire District.
One person's disinformation is another person's facts.
Well, I understand that. But I'm saying it gives them an opportunity to say, this is what we want. This is what the commissions that are working want. This is what the staff need. And this is what we need for the town to function. And if it gets to the end and the misinformation is out there and people are just voting no because they don't understand, well, that's when the representatives that we've all elected should be taking over. I mean, that's where the problem really is. They're all hearing 2%, Rick. Now, 5 years from, maybe we go more toward your formula. But at the moment, if we do something drastic, like take away those 3 referendums, which they're all used to, then we will not win this question on the ballot. And I'm looking to get rid of that 2%. It's a fictional number in my head, based on nothing.
I will agree with Jim that the 2% is nothing, and I do like the fact that it would go to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance to make that final decision if it doesn't pass 3 referendums. With that being said, though, what if we have a compromise and just do 2 referendums, and that way we're not taking it completely away. We're still having them in there, but if they don't pass, you still have the Board of Selectmen or Finance to make that decision that's more educated than the public just saying, I'm voting no.
Well, if you have the 3, you're not changing things too drastically. And charter revisions can be open 2 years from now. It's just the old adage, you can't take the candy from the baby. And that's, most voters, they're looking at their pocketbook. They're looking at what it's going to cost. I'm not against 2, Rebecca. Don't misunderstand me. I'm just saying let's do as minor what we can do for now.
Yeah.
And then if 2 years, we look at it.
Yeah, Jimbo, you have a huge echo in your sound.
Sorry, I'm holding my phone away from my ear.
Sorry.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not looking to stake out a position. I'm simply offering opinions as to what I think we ought to do. But in order for any recommendation of this commission to pass, if it's not unanimous or near unanimous, it stands much less of a chance of being approved by the voters. So my effort through this whole thing will be that we come to agree something we all can agree on. I wish we were doing this in person. I find that a lot more pleasant to be able to speak with people directly. But this is where we're at, so. So we've all got a lot to think about anyway.
Let me ask a question. What do other neighboring towns do?
Well, it depends on the town. It goes all over. Enfield, the town council adopts the budget and that's it. That's the final word.
Right.
Other towns have town meetings that adopt the budget. Other towns have multiple referendums until a budget is passed.
I think the biggest issue that we have right now is the fact that we've had to cut back so much in so many different areas that it's hard to play catch up. So in my opinion, I think anything that we do is not going to fix the situation at all. And that's my concern, is that we're trying to fix something that really isn't our responsibility to be fixing. I think that's a Board of Finance question. Like, do they have options? Do they have suggestions? I mean, we went to our finance to find out, finance person to find out about all this information. Should we go and maybe ask some people on the Board of Finance suggestions that they might have?
Sure, I think that's a wonderful idea. The more input, the better.
Well, my opinion is that we're not deciding anything but do we want a 2%? And how many referendums do we want? And put that out. The other parts of this, really, like you're saying, are not ours. Ours is to decide the process, not what's in the budget. And that's why I keep saying 2 or 3 referendums and go to the Board of Selectmen or Board of Finance.
I totally agree with you on that, but I think that for right now, we have such an issue with our budgets and how they vary in so many different areas that I think taking out the 2% or trying to figure out a different way is not going to help the situation, is all I'm saying. I'm not saying that that's the right way to go about it. I don't think that the 2% is a good thing for us to have, but we got to think of a different alternative that will benefit the town too.
Well, if you're going with what boards have put up, then you're working right with the system. The 2% guides each of these boards and commissions in their decisions, instead of making decisions based on reality.
Rebecca, can I just share something? We have a pretty strong budget public hearing process and stuff, and we have woefully little participation in anything.
Yes, I'm aware of that one.
Public hearing, I don't know that we had maybe a dozen people on our call for the public hearing. Nobody chose to speak. The one person that was asked said he didn't have anything at this time. But so we're putting together a 40-something million budget, and we can't get not one person to speak at a public hearing. And that's just not from this year. If you go back over the last 5 years and you read those minutes, you will see 7 participants, 5 participants. I mean, nobody is even coming out to be involved in the process, even in the processes that are there already. So that would be my only concern is, it's the getting the people out. I like the idea of trying to get everybody roused to get people out to support the budget. That would be awesome. But even in the beginning stages of it, we do not get any participation at all.
Yeah. I think
Because they're looking at 2%.
right. I don't know if changing something in the charter is going to change people's participation in the workshops. Probably not, but don't know. Any other discussion on this tonight?
Other thing on section 8.4 or 8 in general on the side of it.
Yeah.
So the first thing is the CIP group. They get appointed, supposed to be by August 1st. It never happens before August 1st. They don't get the CIP budgets from the staff until the middle of September, and they cannot round by November 1st. There's just not enough time between when they're getting them in mid-September to November 1st. So the dates on all there really need to be examined.
Yes, that is circled on my paper here. I think Kathy Simonelli, again, was the one to bring this up. The dates are not realistic and they don't really work. Let's see.
I thought we had all agreed to do something with that.
Yes, we just haven't gotten there yet.
Okay.
And then the only other thing I'll say is some of your notices in that same section don't make any sense. Let me grab my stickies.
Okay.
I don't know what I did in them. Oh, here it is. So when we talk about the budgets being presented under the general fund budget under section B, we talk about 8.4D, public hearings. So we talk about having a public hearing on a certain day, and then it says, notice of hearing shall be published within 5 days after the submission of the budget. Reality is we actually have to do that notice before we have the public hearing. So having a notice 5 days after the submission of the budget does not make any sense at all. And that's throughout a lot of the sections. I don't know why your notice doesn't say that you need to do the notice ahead of time. I'm not sure what they were trying to get out of this, but the notice has to be before we have to. And we do issue them all before. No, we issue them all before we have them. They go into the paper.
Right.
So a perfect example, when the Board of Selectmen did theirs this year, we did the notice, we put it in the paper, but there was no budget available until just about at the public hearing. But that still doesn't make any sense. What kind of notice would I publish 5 days after?
Yeah, I don't know.
Gotta
Maybe
keep
the
it-
after is supposed to say before.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I wasn't involved in any of the charter writing, so I don't really know enough about it. But just as I read it from a finance perspective, in all those cases where it's telling me to notice it after it was submitted, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because if I'm going to have a public hearing, I want to notice it on the front side.
Right. That makes sense.
Those are only things I came up with that as a finance person, I was like, well, if I had to change things, these are the things I would change.
Yeah, and that's the input we need, because we don't know those things. So that is helpful. Going back to section A for the CIP budget stuff, we have it written now that annually no later than August 1st. Is that when we had talked to Kathy, she said the August and September was fine, but to change the November date.
I think that's what she said.
Yes, I think that's probably fine. It's not happening. The Board of Selectmen are not appointing people before August 1st. If you look in any of the last 5 or 6 ones, they were all done sometime in August prior to September 1st.
Okay.
Not going to get anything until mid-September to do, because we're not asking our department heads to do it until the first part of September. I think our due date this year was September 5th. And then with a turnaround to September 15th to the board. And then I think they first met, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks after that. So I don't think they had their first meeting until the very tail end of September or the beginning of October.
Right. Yeah, because Kathy said to, instead of doing November 1st, put December 1st, or put it so that it's whenever the annual town budgets are due, and just have no date associated to that.
I don't know, Jason, do you have a thought on that?
Mr. Jason from the Board of Selectmen. I actually don't think that that's, based on my experience, both as first selectman and as a member of the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, I don't think that that's prohibitive. I think that we don't do anything with the CIP submissions until the budget process anyway. So if they're turning that in the same time department heads are asked to turn in their operating budget, that's probably gives them more time to do a more thorough job. And quite honestly, it's just going to sit and wait for us to get to it anyway.
And then what, move up the end date to December, whatever Rebecca just read.
Yeah, it says no later than November 1st of each year, but I have a note saying Kathy said that December 1st would be a reasonable date for them. If we were to change that, or to put it, have the language read something like it's due, and have it no later be when the annual town budgets are due. So there's no fixed date for them, but I think it's kind of when they get it done, they know it's going to sit at the time of November, so they get it to the Board of Selectmen when they need it. So I don't think it's an issue, but to make this more reflective of what's happening in real life, I think we could update that for them. Yeah.
Could I go back to the notice of public hearing?
Yes.
Notice it said hearing shall be published within 5 days after. If that were to say receipt of the budget instead of submission of the budget, so that it's requiring the Board of Selectmen, for example, to set their public hearing within 5 days after they receive the budget. To set it, not to hold it necessarily. I think that's the intent of it anyway.
So instead of submission, have it say receive? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean, you could clarify some more of the language. Yeah, if you had receipt in there, all it would mean is that once the Board of Education or the Board of Selectmen receive the budget, they'd have 5 days to set the public hearing date and publish a notice the same.
Then you need to look at the language above that, because it starts with, at the onset of its deliberations.
Well, that still remains the onset of its deliberations, I think. I mean, that doesn't mean the day of its deliberations, I don't think.
This is Jason from the Board of Selectmen. If it's helpful, maybe Amy and I could redline something pertaining to this section and circulate it around.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yes, I would love that.
I thought you might. Can I, if you'd indulge me, can I just offer a couple of insights on the question about the number of referendum or the percentage and all that I think are worth keeping in mind?
Yes, please.
You guys are talking about two different things, really. You're talking about voter empowerment. You're talking about some sort of a cap to stop things from going crazy. The 2% budget is an artificial cap. It's an artificial cap whose ceiling is too low, and it makes it difficult for the town to do the things that we need to do. So if you want to maintain some sort of an artificial cap to make things, stop things from going crazy, perhaps look at a percentage that's in excess of the 2% number. 3% would be 50% better than 2%. Exempting capital and debt allows for growth as well, but it doesn't allow for growth in programs or services. It only allows for growth in terms of infrastructure, which is not to be discounted, as that's important too. But that allows us to make sure that our infrastructure is well enough. It doesn't necessarily say that there's anybody who's going to be around to operate the infrastructure. And then the last thing is that capping the number of referenda is a cap on voter participation. And so if there's any question about whether or not that participation should be supreme, Amy and I are going to disagree. And I'm going to suggest that maybe we eliminate the trigger so that the budget is set at a point in time until the referendum votes in a budget. And with that, and there are lots of towns that do that. In circumstances where we go beyond July 1st, while not ideal, you can make up the difference in any type of a tax increase associated with that in the supplemental tax bill that goes out in January. So if you're going to have an arbitrary cap, what is that arbitrary cap? What should it apply to, and is it appropriate? And then if you're going to have participation in the process, are you going to go all the way with that, or are you going to say participation is going to be a part of this process until a point certain, and then you're out, and it's the elected officials who decide? So I just throw those out as points to consider.
Thank you.
Well, I think it'd be better to have the elected officials decide than a 2% artificial cap, because that makes the budget artificial.
So
I mean, it's tainted.
On that point, Jim, this is Jason again. On that point, we actually have a really good case study that we're about to go through in the next 30 days. The Board of Finance, as elected budget stewards for the town, are going to set the budget for the voters. So we're going to see in real time how things play out, whether or not, when given that open-ended authority, the board takes it and runs with it, or maintains some semblance of self-imposed restraint versus charter-imposed restraint. And there's an argument to be made to say this is an opportunity to catch up on a bunch of things that we haven't been able to do for a number of years. And there's an argument to be made that we need to be responsible stewards of the public's dollar. And where does that balance fall? I think, actually, quite honestly, I think that the proponents of the charter as it exists are going to be pleasantly surprised that restraint will carry the day. But, we'll see what happens.
Right, as long as the right people are in office that practice restraint normally, then they would practice restraint in this regards. I agree with you, Jason.
Somebody's typing.
Sorry, that was me. And my dog is snoring under my desk. Yeah. I don't know what else to say for all this. It's definitely a lot of information. It's helpful. I'm not looking to make a decision one way or the other tonight. I was just typing the kind of the options that we have for this situation, that we are kind of leaning towards in both aspects. But certainly up for more discussion when the time comes. And I don't know if we can see how the budget goes this year around, how that's going to work time-wise for everything. But Jason has his hand up. Go ahead, Jason.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. At the risk of volunteering Amy for more work, at what point in time do you guys want the red line pertaining to section 8.4? And would you be amenable to any other feedback on section 8 from the treasurer's office?
I would love any feedback on 8, just because I think you guys are the ones that are affected by anything that gets changed or is currently in there. So if you have any suggestions to make in any of chapter 8 or section 8, that'd be helpful for us to see. And then obviously as a board, we will walk through all of the changes and corrections and vote on them to see what the changes were for those. So I would be open to that. When is our next meeting? Our next meeting is in 2 weeks on the 21st. Would that be reasonable, or would you guys want it for May 5th?
So if it's not a hindrance on your process, I'd ask that we be able to do it for May 5th. Amy's got a couple of well-deserved vacation days coming up, and I don't want to jam things up too much between some of the healthcare negotiations we're working on and the holiday and her vacation. So if we could have it to you by the 5th, that would be more better.
Everybody from the board okay with the 5th for that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. You guys are good with the 5th to have those red lines for us. And again, if we could have it a couple days sooner, either preferably like for over the weekend so we can review it before our meeting, that would be the best.
Yeah, not the night before, please.
Yeah. Charlie Nordell, Board of Selectmen, has his hand up. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Nordell here speaking. I know it's not public participation, but I just wanted to add to Jason's point, and he's right. This year is a good test. The Board of Finance has the ability this year to set the budget basically wherever they want. But I also think Jimbo's point is very much on too, that he keeps bringing up, and that is that this fictional 2% that we've had for so long is on everybody's target. And yes, it may show restraint, but on top of it, I think it has our current Board of Finance fixated on 2%. And you're going to see a budget this year put forth. It is very close or below 2%.
And that's honestly the whole danger of it.
Well, let's get a feel for the board about how everybody in general feels about eliminating the 2%. I'm for it.
Agreed.
I am too.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I'm for it.
I don't know yet.
So if we went that route and agreed to eliminate the 2%, then are you saying to have 3 referendums and then go to the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, Nicole?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You know, give the voters a chance to have their say, kind of their feedback about what's going wrong with the voting would help the Board of Finance. But yes, there would have to be a backstop. It would have to get passed eventually and somehow, definitely.
Yeah, and I think having that limit of the 3 referendums is still good. That way we can still get a budget passed on a timely fashion and keep things in order.
And another option that was thrown at me is maybe I don't know if I'm so much for it due to cost, but have unlimited referendums until a certain date. And then if it doesn't pass, but I mean, that's always an option.
Yeah, I think that was thrown out to me at some point as well. I think when we had brought it up the first time, I think the unlimited referendums was a immediate kind of boo-hoo from the board. Is that still the consensus from the board that we don't really want to have the unlimited referendum?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of money.
Yeah,
I mean, to keep throwing money out there, I mean, I definitely agree with the referendums, whether it's 2 or 3, and then having to go to something, that's fine. You know, the fact still remains, it's just getting people out to vote. I'm not down with securing signatures and all that, because who's going to be knocking on doors getting signatures every time a budget's going to come out? So I do think it has to come down to a vote. How many referendums that is, 2 or keep it at 3. This is our chance to kind of make a change, but also not too radical, I guess.
yeah. Okay, well, we can mark those down and continue this discussion. Is there anything else that anybody wanted to discuss tonight? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Rick, seconded by Nicole. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, guys. We will
Good night, guys.
be back up later. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Jason, for recording this.
Not a problem. It'll be
Stay safe,
on the
everyone.
website.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take
Bye,
care.
Good
guys.
night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.